So what I'd like to talk about with you today is how Iran exercised their political, economic, and military influence in Iraq in a way that significantly destabilized the situation there and resulted, one, in the prolonging of the sectarian violence that racked the country in 2006, but also resulted in the deaths of hundreds of American soldiers and thousands of Iraqi civilians. And that is a regime that could not ever be a productive member of the international community. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, I should tell you that I am one of 26 Americans that are on a list in Tehran that bans me from visiting. So I have some experience in what it means to be listed, but that is not a list that I am looking to be delisted from. At least while that regime is in power. But let me just take a few minutes to talk you through how Iran almost played a significantly negative role in our mission in Iraq. We believed all along that their mission was to see a supportive government in place in Iraq. And they worked very hard to do that. But at the same time, they worked very hard for us not to succeed, to deny the United States of America their objectives of establishing Iraq as a peaceful and democratic country. And often, as you can imagine, those two goals were in opposition to each other. So in our early days in Iraq, I will tell you that the political influence was very visible, but what was not visible to us in the early days was the military influence. In fact, we got our first inkling of Iraqi Quds Force influence in Iraq, Iranian Quds Force influence in Iraq, about 35 days after I got there. And some of you will remember in early August of 2004, there was a major battle in Najaf. As we went forward, basically throughout 2005, we were executing the process that had been given to us by the United Nations Security Council. We were to have elections in January 2005 to elect a transitional government, a transitional parliament, that would draft a constitution. We would hold a referendum on that constitution in October, and then the Iraqis would conduct a further election in December of 2005 that would elect a government based on that constitution. So you then had in Iraq a constitutionally elected Iraqi government that would guide the country forward. We saw increased Iranian influence in the election process. Lots of money to Iraqi political parties, lots of humanitarian support in the name of gaining political support. But it wasn't until the summer of 2005 where we began to see increased military support. And at that point, we saw increased Iranian arming of the Shia militia with some improvised explosive devices that were just talked about here earlier. And what we saw was our casualties were going up. So we launched a significant effort to find out where the Iranian operatives were in Iran. Because it's one thing to be able to say, yes, there's political influence, yes, there's economic influence, but to tell me where the Quds Force operative is, at what time, in what place, on what floor in the apartment building so that they can be attacked is quite another thing. So we began a significant intelligence gathering process that would allow us to target the Iranian groups. Let me talk just a second about these improvised explosive devices. They're called explosively formed penetrators. I don't want to get too technical, but they have to be made with machine tools. And that technology was not available in Iraq. They could only come from one place, and that was Iran. And these are designed The explosives are formed in a way that they shoot a copper charge that goes so fast that it'll actually penetrate the side of a tank. And this was a significant problem for our soldiers and the Iraqi soldiers because their armored vehicles were their best protection against the improvised explosive devices. About 2 months after we started seeing the increase of this, we actually found a cache inside our city. And the cache was full of these, and they were clearly made in Iran. In addition, we found the newest type of rocket-propelled grenade that was also made in Iran. And we found a number of mortar rounds and rockets that were clearly marked with Iranian markings. And we continued over the fall and winter of 2005 to find this type of equipment. Hadi al-Amri was also the head of the Badr Corps, which was a Shia militia tied to the Skiri party now called ISKI. We believe that the Badr Corps was an active militia and was actively out conducting attacks against primarily Sunni civilians. After the elections in 2005, I asked for a meeting with him because I wanted to see if there was any reason that we should try to work with the Badr Corps. And in the course of this meeting, he was sitting directly across the table from me, and I popped the question to him. I looked him right in the eye and said, "Mr. Amri, are you being supported by Iran?" And he stopped. He paused, and he went like this. "No." And that told me that he was lying, and it told me that I had nothing left to do with Hadi al-Amri. And the fact that he got into the White House is unbelievable to me. The other element in 2006 that I wanted to mention is we briefed the new incoming Prime Minister Maliki, who you've heard about today, but we showed him what was being done by the Iranians in Iraq. And when I finished the briefing, he looked at me and said, "They are conducting terrorism in my country." And I said, "You're right, Prime Minister, they are, and it needs to stop." We also briefed the Presidency Council and showed them the same thing, and they had a similar reaction. But the answer was there was not the political will by the Iraqis to pressure the Iranians to stop the disruption. All of our hard work on intelligence came to bear fruition right before Christmas of 2006. And we had been tracking some operatives around Baghdad, and we caught 6 of them in what amounted to a safe house. And we thought they were all Quds Force operatives, but the Iranian embassy immediately said that 4 of the operatives were actually under diplomatic protection because they worked for the embassy. The other 2 they couldn't make that argument for, so we hung on to them. But what did we find? First, we found the location we found them was right adjacent to the Badr Corps headquarters. And then they had maps on the wall that clearly showed that they were plotting to push the Sunni population out of the neighborhoods they were in so they could expand the control of the Shia militias across Baghdad. I mean, they had sections of Baghdad marked in different colors and arrows on the maps designating the way for future operations. There was money, there was weapons receipts, there was no question that this was an Iranian-supported operation. As with any good operation, we exploited the information there and were able to continue to put pressure on the Iranian operatives throughout 2007 and gradually reduce the flow of support. Why do I tell you all this? Some of it's ancient history. But I tell you all this because that is how Iran operates. They destabilized Iraq. They used terror as the means of accomplishing their political and ideological objectives. They're a destabilizing force in Iraq. They're a destabilizing force in the region. And it is not a regime that is capable of being a productive member of this world order. And they will not be removed without an effective and active democratic opposition. Thank you very much.